Welcome to campus this afternoon where we are studying the book of Hebrews chapter 11, and we're going to continue talking about Moses today. Those of you who don't know anything about campus, first of all, excuse this. Woke up to bad hair, put stuff on it, and it became worse. So I had no choice. It was either that or I've had bad hair before. This is really bad. So, yeah, I don't know. I almost didn't after this morning. First commandment. There's one God, have no other God before him. Second commandment is don't make any graven images, no idols. And so our message today out of Hebrews 11 is talking about Moses, and particularly we're going to finish this up today with Moses, and next week get into Rahab and other people mentioned in Hebrews Hall of Fame of Faith. But with Moses, it really is about having no other gods before him and Moses pursuing that relationship. I hope to encourage whoever listens to today's message, myself included, to kind of try to live with an eternal view in mind, to live with that long view of our relationship with him going on into the eternities, and in every circumstance that we face, try to have that view. So this is kind of the application of what we're going to talk about now. We spent some time with a thumbnail sketch of Moses' life last week, and we paid particular attention to the faith that was exhibited by his parents, particularly Jochebed, who saw he was a handsome child and believed, because of the Hebrew culture, that this child had something important, and so didn't throw him in the Nile as commanded and had some civil disobedience on her part. So let's take the rest of that is said of Moses and his actual faith, beginning at verse 24 through 29. The writer says, by faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. We could all take that right now. We could all say, let's abandon each other's company and go enjoy a nice trip to Vegas, or what's that other place? Wendover, and go just party it up with the people who live for the flesh and things and enjoy their sin for a season. Verse 26, Moses, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt, for he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. Tough line. By faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. By faith they passed through the Red Sea as by dry land, which the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned. So that covers the verses on faith of Moses, applying it to his life and the history that we read about in the Old Testament. Back to verse 24, by faith Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. We gave the history last week of him becoming a son of Pharaoh's daughter, how that happened, being put in the bulrushes, Miriam, the mother, the whole thing, the parallels to Christ. After 40 years of being groomed under the Egyptians' hands, it appears that Moses had a very strong confidence that God had called him to be a leader of his people. Now, we might ask ourselves, at what point did Moses know that he was supposed to do this? We might suggest that it was way back when his mother believed that he had a special purpose. And we think that we know that she was his nurse, and she could have lived with him in Pharaoh's chambers as the mother of him and helped raise him. And we suggested last week that his mother could have whispered into his ear, you have a destiny, Moses. You have a purpose. This we know. This is why we didn't throw you in the Nile, Moses. So it could have been from a very young age. That's conjecture, but we don't know. We also know from the account of Exodus that it said it was upon his heart to serve his brethren. After 40 years of being an Egyptian, he recognizes that they're his brethren, and it was upon his heart to go out and see them. So maybe this was his call. Shortly thereafter, we know he killed an Egyptian, and he buried this Egyptian in the sand. Now, the Jewish Encyclopedia tells us that the Jews, or at least the ones who published this encyclopedia, did not believe that Moses committed murder. Why? Because according to their tradition, this Egyptian was raping a child of one of the children of Israel, and Moses interfered in that and caught him and killed him for it. So that's their tradition as to how they say he wasn't just a guy who went around killing people. He had justification for it, and that's part of their tradition. That's not in Scripture, but that's what they say. But let's suppose that Moses knew in his heart at the time when he went out to observe his brethren that God was calling him to have some interaction with them now. And that's quite possible. But whenever it was, we're left with some fascinating facts. First, it appears that Moses somehow believed that he was going to liberate the nation of Israel. It's possible that when he killed that Egyptian, he had it on his heart, I'm going to be doing the liberating, and I'm going to start now. You, Egyptian, are hurting one of my sisters. I'm going to take care of it. And he operated by the flesh. And he took it in his own hands, and he killed the guy. And God, of course, had other plans for him, because Moses subsequently fled from the wrath of Pharaoh, who imposed a death sentence upon him. And God said, you're going to go out into the wilderness, and you're not going to lead the children of Israel out by the arm of your flesh. That's not what I meant when I called you. He made a mistake. He misinterpreted. And so the Lord had other plans. And so no matter what we say, it was the killing of the Egyptian that got Moses out of there. And he left out into the wilderness, and he spent his time another full 40 years shepherding and taking that skill that he was learning under the hand of God to actually shepherd 1 million plus people out of Egypt. And that was when the Lord would put him to work. Recently, we had a woman who was attending campus regularly in the afternoon. The mornings are growing, but the afternoons are dwindling. And the woman was attending the afternoon, and she left our presence altogether, unfortunately. And she left because she could not figure out personally God's call on her life or comprehend what it means to walk by faith. It has plagued her. I've known her for a while and talked to her, and she just couldn't get her hands around it. These stories that we read in Scripture illustrate for us how God seems to work. He doesn't tell us exactly how Moses knew. But in the case of Moses, while it was put on his heart to go out and look upon his brethren, note how long it took God to actually use him. It was another 40 plus years of training and getting Moses ready to do the thing that he was going to do. It requires patience. I realize we have touched on this concept a couple of times. I'm going to be quick in the recent past, but the longer I live, the more I see that when it comes to God working with us, he takes a lot of time. He works and drips and slowly processes us out of the stuff we've experienced as children. And it takes such long suffering to walk with God and to get the answers and the patience. And so first, our job is to recognize the call, the vocare from the Latin, like vocation. You hear the call, vocare, the vocal call upon your life, and that's tough. And it comes by examining our hearts and our ambitions and how we're naturally gifted by him. And I would suggest that once we discover how God has gifted us and our propensity and how he clearly wants the contents of our heart to be right, then the best thing to say is that we let him lead. And that's not an easy thing to kind of quantify and put into a box and say, this is how it looks to let him lead. Because we're in this constant battle between our flesh and our spirit. So we watch doors open, we watch doors close, we react accordingly, we take advantage of situations when they appear, we accept defeat when it seems like things are defeated, all the while kind of keeping our heads in the clouds with that eternal perspective that we're looking to see. How do we please God? How do we follow God in this subjective relationship we have with him? And our feet on the ground, which means we aren't entirely, our heads aren't in the clouds. We are on this thing. We pay our bills. We do the things that we get our jobs. We get education. our feet are on the ground. We're in this world, but we're not of this world. That old cliche. All the while, God will be leading and he will be working. Our job is to trust that completely. And along the way, we begin to exercise our propensities and apply them to situations that mirror his ultimate goal, hopefully. Moses shepherded out in the wilderness, did 40 years, for goodness sake, in order to prepare him to shepherd those people. I mean, it's all by design. David, remember, he did the same. He fought lions, he fought bears with his bare hands, it says, as a shepherd boy, before he fought Goliath. It's a preparation time. Many of the apostles were fishers of fish before Jesus called them to make them fishers of men. This is a training, and time doesn't mean anything, to God, for us. It doesn't seem like. He'll prepare us for 99 years and use us for a day for his purposes. Are we willing to allow that to go on in our life? And that's where the patience comes in. Back in the 1970s, my mom, I remember this vividly. She called a local supermarket that was known as Alpha Beta in Southern California and complained because she had gone in and bought a roast, and the roast was rancid, and to use alliteration, and it reeked. So she called, and two men came to our house, and they were in Alpha Beta uniforms, which included a tie and white shirts at that time. And they sat down on the couch, and I remember, as a young kid, just hearing my mom complain about this terrible roast and that they should do better. And the men were very apologetic, and they had a bag in their hands, and they gave her another roast, and they hoped she would continue shopping with them. Years later, one of those men, in the latter years of his life, really, took the skills that he garnered from having that face interaction and meeting with people and calming them and reassuring them and trying to make amends for things that have gone wrong, and he applied it to the Lord, and that was Chuck Smith. He worked at the Alpha Beta, and that's how he worked through ministry as he was going through there. And so the Lord takes us, and we don't like it. I mean, Paul talks about his work is not easy to enjoy because he doesn't lay it out for us. He doesn't tell us. He leads us through increasing our faith. The point is the Lord prepares the faithful, and he takes his time doing it. Moses, believing that God was able to deliver his brethren and trusting him so much, he was willing to forego, the writer says, the splendid, luxurious prospects which opened before him in Egypt. Or as the writer says, by faith he refused, quote, to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter. It's a heavy line because it intimates that Moses turned from all the blessings of his life and honor to serve the living God. And I think it's probably a remarkable example in the history of people out there because he had it all. I'm personally overwhelmed when I meet people of such faith. Many of us have met them. They are not at all of this world. They are solely, and it's not like they're so into God that they're jerks to people. We've met them too. They are so into God, they ooze with love, and they don't really have a tie to this world, and they don't have a tie to the attitudes of this world either. They're not uppity, they're not mean, they are just love the Lord and they're selfless. I'm not such a man. I love art and music and film too much. And it comes sometimes, I have to judge between my love for God and those types of things. And that's personally, that's just an admittance, But I've met these other guys, and they just are the salt. And I view them with such admiration. You don't want to name names, but in a sense, that Kirk Cameron guy, who I don't know much about him, and I don't think I agree with a lot of the things he says, but he was kind of Pharaoh's daughter. He kind of had the whole Hollywood thing going and everything, and supposedly, I guess, he walked away. It's impressive when people have Egypt at their back and they say, I can go this way or that, and they choose the Lord. Far more impressive than Cameron is Moses. Because according to verse 25, he didn't just walk from Egypt, but it says he chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God, rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. So he didn't only turn from luxury and fame, he turned to suffering. Problems and afflictions. Psalms 84:10 adds this, saying, for a day in thy courts is better than 1,000. I had rather be a doorkeeper in the house of my God than to dwell in the tents of wickedness. That's the attitude. I tend to think most of us have limits to our devotions to God. We have the taproot problem that kind of goes down and keeps the tree upright in this world. My taproot problem, over the years, I've probably had them all. Wine, women, and song, and love film, no matter what it is, if it's good film, and there's just that thing in me, that taproot problem. Some of us would serve God every day of our lives unless the right opportunity comes along. And if that right opportunity is timed at the right place, whether it comes by occupation or education or art or a big enough house or a big enough bank account, whatever, with a little self-reflection, we probably all know what that taproot thing is that draws us away and tends to get us, like I said at the beginning, to serve an idol and to not have him be our God and our King, and to remove us out of our first love and to stay in Egypt. I really want to know constantly, and it's almost a daily thing, where my weaknesses lie, so I want to beat them into submission by the Spirit. And I know pretty much where I'm at, and what as scary as it is to say, I want to be presented with them on a platter so that I can look at them honestly and say, okay, that one could lead me from God. Sometimes, it could be wearing a dress. I can look at that and say, that one could take me from God. So it's best to just have it out there on the open than to hide it, because then you can entertain all sorts of things. So it's better to just say, this could lead me from God. And we're tested in those things in our lives. He will bring forward the false idols of our lives. And he'll give us an opportunity to say, I'm going to pursue them or I'm going to let them go. The amazing thing is most believers come to the point where the big offers carry little weight. It's the little ones sometimes, it's the little ones, to hold our tongue, that sometimes we're like, for this one, I've got to let my flesh reign. And things can be enticing for a minute, but in the end, most tenured believers would trade most of the big draws. In School of Ministry, we were taught for men, it was the 3 G's. It's girls, it's glory, or it's gold. Those 3, they will test you. I've had the test of the girls since I've been in ministry, believe that or not, looking at me. I've had, not only it's the large biker girls who like this look. I've had the test of the glory, and I've gone in and out and I've failed on that. And I've had the test of the gold. I don't want to excuse the personal example, but this is a true story, and I've been kind of waiting in my life to be able to share it. This is an honest to God true story. And I am not embellishing any of it, and you can check the facts with my wife as it unfolded. Years ago, when we were doing the television show here in Utah, we got a call from a guy who said, I want to donate my estate to your ministry. And so he said, can Shawn come over and visit me? So, automatically I'm getting the gold thing. He wants to donate his estate. So I'm thinking, holy crud, now we're not going to have to ask for funds, and we're not going to beg for trying to stay alive. An estate. So I get the address, and I go over to the house, and he lives on the end unit of these dilapidated apartments. And he's standing outside waiting for me. And so, I'm a little fearful of getting lice or rabies or something going in, but I'm trying to be Jesus, I'm role playing, honest to God. I'm just like, maybe he's got something in there. I'm thinking this. So I go in, and we are talking. I went on a mission in Pennsylvania with a Mormon church, and we're talking, I have seen hoarders. This was hoarder beyond compare. He was a hoarderette. He was hoarding, up to the ceiling hoarding. And mostly it was like boxes and corrugated boxes, but for some reason it seems like hoarders love nutritional products, and they're like foaming over, and the place reeked. And he's not really completely cogent. And if boxes full of dehydrated squid beak for cancer, and I'm like, this would be someone who's donating their estate to our ministry, right? So he wants to start off by going into the kitchen. He shows me some juicers that still have various forms of juice stuck to them. These really are good, they work. And then he continues on, and there's these unopened boxes of Larry Holmes grills and this stuff, and I'm starting to get itchy. And he's like, I want to take you into the back bedroom. There's no lights, the wallpaper's peeling. We go in the back bedroom, there's a bedroom, and it's stacked up, and there's these wood crates on the floor. And he starts taking stuff off, and he goes, I want to show you these. He opens the wood crates, and in these 10 wood crates, they were full of antique guns. And he said, I think these are probably worth about, because I was in this business, probably about $250,000. I'm like, whoa. So, of course, I've suddenly become very friendly with him. And, juicer and all, let me help you. And he goes on and he starts estimating the value of that. And then I become a different man inside. I've got the gold staring me in the face. Then he says, come out to the living room, and he's unearthed some other things. And he has gold coins in these boxes. And he's got another $300K of gold coins that he's bought over the years. So I'm doing the tallies in my head. By the time we're done, he shows me the statements to his investments, and his statements from the different investment houses were up there, and the total was about $750,000 from that house. And he says, I want to make you, do you know an attorney? I want to make Aletheia Ministries the recipient of this estate. I think I could find an attorney, so I leave, I get on the phone, I call our attorney, he sets it up, we go in the next day, and the guy writes it out. This is my last will and testament, that Aletheia Ministries is the recipient of this estate. And then he tells me, as I'm taking him back home to drop him off, I'm going on a 2-month trip in my truck. And the truck is like a Beverly Hillbillies truck. And he's in his 80s, and I'm thinking, yes! I am! I'm thinking he's gonna go. And then I'm thinking, I think when he's gone, I should just probably go and get all that stuff out of there. This is coming through my head. Because, he's old. I doubt he's going to make it back. I'll put it in safekeeping. It's ours anyway. It's everything going through my head. And the G is gold, gold, gold. And I'm telling you, I'm ashamed to admit it, the things that went through my head that I was faced with as I saw all that stuff, and I couldn't let it go until I had to make the cognitive decision. Do I love God and his ways more or my own? And I had to make that decision in my head. And when I did, honestly, it was like people describe being born again. It was lifted from me. I was obsessed in my head with what to do, and it was lifted from me, and then I didn't care. So I was calling him for the first few days to see if he was safe on the road. And after that, I just said, whatever it is. I knew it was there. I knew it was close. I knew I could get to it. I knew all of it. And I was just like, who cares? And so by his grace and spirit, because I made the decision by his spirit, really, to just let it go, then it was freed. And it was no longer a temptation. But that's how it kind of comes, And Moses, I'm sure, we have this thing. I would love to tell you that Aletheia Ministry continues to be the heir of the estate, but after 2 years, something amazing happened. And again, I was tested with it. I get a call from this guy. Hey, Shawn, this is whatever. Hey, remember, you're the heir of my estate? I said, yeah, I vaguely remember that. I want you to come to Temple Square, and I want you to meet some sister missionaries. And you see, one of them was a sister missionary from Russia, a very attractive Russian sister missionary who had captured this guy's heart. I want you to come down and kind of help me field questions with him. So we go down there, and we sit down, and our benefactor is all googly-eyed over this 22-year-old, and they start in on the charade, and things get a little kind of heated, and I can tell from him he's not appreciating my tone and everything else. And in the end, I said, I really can't do this anymore. I've got to go. And I got up, and an older missionary couple, there's about 6 of them around at the time, put his hands on my shoulders, and he said, hey, brother, your friend just wants the truth. Can't we just talk about truth here? And I looked at my friend's face, $750,000, it was like the cartoons sitting there, and I had a decision. I could either sell out and go sit down and play the game, or I could say what I wanted. And, again, it was because of the previous decision by the Holy Spirit that allowed me to let it go, that allowed me to take the older missionary's hands off my shoulders, and I just said, bite the wall, and walked out. And 2 days later, our benefactor called and said, I didn't like the words that you said to that kind old man. And so Aletheia now is back where we started. But, you can't live if you don't live it for him. You've got to live it for him. And it's not that you're not tried. You will be tested. And if it's not a $750,000 estate, it will be something simple as forgiving somebody who was mean to you. It's a constant decision. So Moses seems to have been, at least from the narrative, impervious to such things of the flesh, because the writer says he, verse 25, chose rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Moses, instead of hobnobbing with Egypt's high and mighty, he chose to hobnob with slaves. And the picture is that of Christ, who was criticized for hanging out with sinners and the great unwashed, chose, instead of to hang out with the high and mighty of Israel, chose to hang out with the slaves. Chose to hang out with the weak and the dirty. I mean, what both Moses and Jesus after him did was they willingly chose to save a nation of slaves, leading them out of miserable captivity, of indentured servitude, and into the promised land. That's how the picture of Moses is so significant to Christ. And both, Colossians talks about Jesus, he willingly submitted himself below all things. It wasn't wrong for him to make himself equal with God, but he became less than all things. And the same thing is what it's being written of Moses here. So in both cases, the poor and the crushed and the despised, not the powerful and the mighty, were saved. Moses submitted himself to their lifestyle, to their travails. He turned his back on Egypt. He walked with them through that desert. He put up with their junk, just as Christ did the same. The writer of Hebrews says that by faith, Moses chose this. Not because he was driven away for doing the killing. By faith, Moses chose this. And after 40 years returned because God called him and he listened, and in faith he moved toward doing God's will rather than enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. We could suppose that as an accepted Egyptian in the king's court, when it says rather than to live a lifestyle of sin or whatever it says, that's a paraphrase, we could say that he was a sinful man as an Egyptian. I think it's just generally speaking of the lifestyle outside of the true and living God was sinful. And instead of enjoying that lifestyle, he moved on. Verse 26, we learn the attitude of Moses. The writer says, quote, verse 26, esteeming the reproach of Christ greater riches than the treasures in Egypt. For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward. The first thing to note here is the writer uses the name Christ in association with Moses. We could think that he was saying that Moses knew Christ and chose to suffer, and that the treasures of Christ that he literally knew he was suffering for. I think that's a mistake. At first glance, if you were LDS, you would say that's true. Moses knew Christ because Adam knew Christ. They all knew the gospel plan, but that is not what it is saying. We know Moses prophesied of the coming Messiah. That's in Deuteronomy 18:15. This is what it says. The Lord thy God will raise up unto thee a prophet from the midst of thee, of thy brethren, like unto me, Moses wrote. Unto him you will hearken. So we know that he had a prophetic utterance of the Messiah to come. All scholars of the Bible say that's a messianic prophecy that Moses wrote of the Messiah to come. And Moses wrote, he will be like unto me. Okay? But even though the word for prophet is nabi in the Hebrew, which means an inspired one, like a prophet, and not Meshiach, which is Messiah, every scholar agrees Moses was speaking of the Messiah to come. So in this sense, the writer could be saying that Moses esteemed the reproaches he would take because he trusted that the promised Messiah was going to come, would be sent to his people, and this was of far greater value than all the treasures of Egypt. And the same thing sits in our laps. What is of most value? Really, truly, what do you value the most? And I believe there's no guilt or anything. I believe we will get kind of what we want. We will get what is of most value to us. If it's Christ, you will get what Christ has to offer you. If it's not, you will receive what is of most value to you. And I think that we typically choose these things, and we kind of get where our heart's desire is. Some believe the writer was suggesting that Moses esteemed or believed that he was suffering the way the Messiah would suffer. I think that reads too much into it. Either way, Moses, by faith, he walked by faith, he suffered for it, and what seemed to move him was his love for his brethren, because he was called or elected by God to help save them from where they were. Then we get this fumbly line in the King James. It says, "For he had respect unto the recompense of the reward." What does that mean? It means that he had his eyes fixed on what he believed would be a coming reward for taking this act, for choosing to esteem his work with the children of Israel as far more valuable than working and being in Egypt, and that he had faith that he would be rewarded for that. There was certainly no earthly remuneration for Moses and his efforts. He didn't get anything really from this earth except trials. And yet, in another example of faith, Moses believed that the recompense for what he was doing was coming from God hereafter. It's kind of a good barometer for us. I often will say, is this something God would be pleased with? Is this something that he would want to reward me for? And I don't mean I'm doing it for the rewards, but it just helps me see the mindset of, does this behavior translate into something that he would be pleased with, or is it something that he's not going to be pleased with? And it helps us see where exactly we are, both in our motivations and in our actions. I really believe this view. I think that it's kind of tough to accept. It's not fun to think about. Could be wrong, but if I didn't really believe it, I wouldn't share it. So in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 6 of Matthew, Jesus has been speaking, and he says at verse 1, "Take heed that you do not your alms before men, to be seen of them. Otherwise you have no reward of your Father which is in heaven. Therefore, when you do us your alms, do not sound a trumpet before you, as the hypocrites do in the synagogue and in the streets, that you may have glory of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward. But when you do your alms, when you give to the poor, when you donate or whatever, let not the left hand know what the right hand doeth, that thine alms may be in secret, and thy Father which sees in secret himself shall reward thee openly." So we have a model there in Matthew of how to do alms financially, to give to the poor. Don't do it with a trumpet. Don't let it be seen. Don't let it be known by everybody, so that men will glory in the thing that you're doing. Then he goes on in verse 5. "And when you pray," so we have how to give. "And when you pray, thou shalt not be as the hypocrites are, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and in the corners of the streets, that they may be seen of men. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward." If you jump down to verse 16 of the same chapter, we read Jesus repeating the same line, and he says, "Moreover, when you fast, be not as the hypocrites of sad countenance, for they disfigure their faces, that they may appear unto men to fast. Verily I say unto you, they have their reward." 3 times he says this. They have their reward when you give your alms, when you pray, and when you fast. Don't be doing it so to be seen of men. And it says the glory of men. So you receive their glory. So in these short passages, Jesus emphatically says, prefacing it with verily, that when we give alms, pray, or fast, we ought to be secret, private about it, because to do it, to be seen of men, automatically gives us our reward. So the challenge is, do you want the praise of men? The fact that men have witnessed us doing the things that God wants us to do, to heap on glory, or the Lord. Now, I can't help but believe that no matter what we do in this life, we can kind of break down the results, no matter what area it is, into this reward system. Either we will be rewarded here, we'll be rewarded here and there, or we will not be rewarded there at all. It's kind of in that category on how we do things, and that also helps with the motivation. Instead of trying to provide a laundry list to fill the category of what is here and there, and what is not at all afterward, God knows our motivation. And we will receive the rewards for the acts here, there, or possibly in both places. This was especially true of things that people do to be seen of men in the religious sense. Just a thought, verse 27. By faith, Moses forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible. We've already covered the context of the first part, but what does it mean when he says, as seeing him who is invisible? As if he saw God, we could write that. He did it as if he could see the invisible God. Now, last week, Carrie asked about scripture saying that Moses saw God and spoke with him face to face. And there are a number of words for seeing in the Greek. One of those is blepo. That means for me to see you, you to see me, in the physical sense. And another word is horeo, and it means to perceive the presence as if we had physical validation, but we don't actually see it. And that horeo would fit in if we said to somebody, I see what you mean. That's horeo, okay? There's, I see you standing there, and I see what you mean. I see you standing there, blepo. I see what you mean, horeo, okay? So when the writer of Hebrews says, by faith he forsook Egypt, not fearing the wrath of the king, for he endured as seeing him who is invisible, the Greek word is blepo, right? No, it's, you Sharpies, it's horeo. As seeing an invisible God. He acted as if he could see into the eternities. Through his spiritual perceptions, Moses had no more doubt that God had called him to this work and that he would sustain him. And if he saw him with, then if he saw him with bodily eyes and God spoke to him and said, and he could watch God's non-anthropomorphic mouth speak, it would be the same. That's how much faith, and that's why Moses is included in this Hall of Fame of faith. So in this description, we see a really good illustration of what it means to walk by faith through Moses. Because the things he did, he believed that he would be rewarded for them. He believed God would see them through. He did them with that heart, and he also believed it was as if God, he had seen him, the invisible God, and that God had told him. That's how much faith was motivating him. Verse 28, the writer adds, through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. Okay? Take all that passage into context. Through faith he kept the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. If you take the context of that passage, you know that when it says through faith he kept the Passover, that this doesn't mean that he was keeping the Passover and then as a result, the spirit of death that passed over them didn't take them. It's he instituted the Passover. That's what that means. And most of the scholars I consulted suggest that's what it means. That by faith Moses instituted the Passover and the sprinkling of blood, lest he that destroyed the firstborn should touch them. So it was faith that said, okay, this is what God has told us to do. Let's take the animals, let's shed the blood, let's put it on the doorposts and on the upper mantle, and our firstborn will be protected. And it was faith that led him, we have to do that because God had said so. And of course, the firstborn in Egypt didn't die because of that. And of course, the sprinkling of the blood refers to the same thing. Again, all these things done in faith by Moses and on Moses for the behalf of the nation of Israel. Interestingly, our last verse, where I initially thought it was speaking of Moses because I casually read it, it doesn't. He's included in this, and it's because of him they were there, and he was leading them in faith, but it now speaks of the children of Israel as a whole. So we actually have another party who is mentioned in the Hebrews 11. It says, by faith they passed through the Red Sea, as by dry land, which the Egyptians, essaying to do, were drowned. So they, the children of Israel, by faith passed through the Red Sea when it was as if it was dry land, and the Egyptians attempted to do the same thing, but they were drowned. All right? So now we see the leadership and certainly the miracles that Moses had performed had an influence on the nation of Israel. And the writer says that it was by this faith that they had seen that they moved through. Moses had done the miracles. They had faith that another miracle would happen. Same picture with Christ. He did his miracles. People saw those and believed on him to be the promised Messiah. The same picture. I don't believe that this means that every soul who went through the Red Sea, every single one had faith. Could, but I personally think that it means that as a whole, they entered in as the nation of Israel and crossed through the Red Sea as on dry land, and it was faith that motivated them to do this because they saw the miracles that Moses, who led them, had done, and they believed another one was going to be performed. The writer then cross-references this act of faith by a whole nation going through the Red Sea that was parted, to those who tried to essay, it says in the King James, the same thing, but without faith. The Egyptians who pursued them, they tried to go through too, but they were trying to go and pursue after the nation of Israel without faith. And what happened to them? The end result, they were drowned. The picture is this. We are only going to escape. We're going to have the seas parted. We'll go through on dry ground, and we're going to escape destruction by faith. When the Egyptians thought that they could pass through in the same way, lacking faith, they were destroyed. We could say that about anybody who enters the kingdom of heaven. It's the faith that gets us to avoid the destruction that awaits, not the fact, not to try to enter into it without that faith. In that case, they would perish or drown. And there ends the coverage of Moses as discussed here in Hebrews chapter 11. Questions, comments? Where can you get a headband like this? Nowhere on earth. Any questions or comments?